is the Prophet ﷺ has lost Khadija radiallahu anha, and he has the same year in which Khadija died, he had a dream that somebody was carrying something wrapped in a piece of silk, and the man said to him, "This is your wife, so uncover her." And he opened it, and it was Aisha radiallahu anha. And he had this dream 3 times. And he, you can imagine, because she was very young. The Prophet ﷺ was 50, over 50. Aisha radiallahu anha was very young. He's actually slightly less. He's about 49. Aisha is very young. And he said, if Allah is going to make this happen, He'll make it happen. And then the confirmation came from Khawla, the wife of Uthman ibn Mad'un, who said, "You should marry somebody." And she was helping out in the house. And he said, "Who?" And she said, "Either Aisha, the daughter of Abu Bakr, or Sauda." Now, I think it's important, too, that you realize the fact that Khawla tells him to marry Aisha is very indicative of the fact that that was not an unusual thing in their culture. Obviously, in this culture, it would be a completely shocking thing. In that culture, and this is something important, even in most modern anthropological methodologies, one of the things they teach people in anthropology is to have what they call ipake, or to try to remove one's social frames of reference when one is examining another culture, because it's unfair to superimpose one's own prejudices upon another culture. You have to recognize that each culture has its own traditions and its own way of doing things. And if you try to force upon them your own ideals, your own principles, and your own acceptabilities, then what you end up doing is being unjust towards another tradition, right? And that's really important. Now, for the Muslim, obviously, it's going to be, what does the Sharia say, right? But it's important to recognize that this was a normal thing within their society, and nobody was shocked by that. It was just part of their culture. That's really an important thing to remember. And the other thing is that Aisha radiallahu anha, there's some different riwayat, but in Sahih al-Bukhari it says, there's a riwayat that she was 9 or that she was 12, but the Prophet ﷺ actually did not take her into his household until she gave up playing. In other words, that was the sign that she was no longer a child. So he was not with her as a child. And that's really important to note. In other words, she was an adult when the Prophet ﷺ brought her into his household. And one of the things in here mentioned, Aisha realized something had changed her status, because they wouldn't let her play out in the streets. Right? She had to play inside the house. But she was still playing. And at the point that she gave up her dolls and became an adult was when she was ready to become a wife. Prior to that, she was not. But the contract, and this is something that Sharia permits. So that's just an important thing to remember. And if you look also in the Oxford Dictionary of the Bible, it says in there that they think that probably Maryam, or Mary, alayhi salam, was between 12 and 14. They recognize that was the age of where a woman got married in that culture. So the Christians who say, how is it that the Prophet ﷺ is marrying somebody so young? The truth is that was very normal both in the Hebraic and Semitic cultures, and in most parts of the world, including China and India and other places. So it's really modern society that has extended the age of marriage. And there's an important book, really, and the only reason I'm emphasizing this, because this is an issue that Orientalists and a lot of non-Muslims will bring up. And this is something that Christians like to point on. So this is what's called a shubha, so I want to make sure all of you understand why we don't accept it as a doubtful matter. There's an important book by Neil Postman, which is called The Disappearance of Childhood. And one of the things that he writes in there is that childhood was in fact an invention of Renaissance Europe. That prior to the Renaissance Europe, children became adults at about the age of 7 or 8. And in fact, in England, in their common law, if a 7 or an 8-year-old stole a horse, they were hung as an adult. And it's in fact, Islam extended the age for military service to 15, which in that time was radical. We know there were children crusades. They had children 9, 10, 11 years old that went on a crusade to the Holy Land against the Muslims. So the Christians had child soldiers, and the Muslims, 15 was the age in which a child was allowed, which a young man was allowed to be a combatant. So that's important to note. And then the other thing is that the Sharia recognizes the onset of puberty, the least of which is 9 years of age. So if a child has a period before 9, they're still not considered mukallafa. When she has her period, if she's 9 and above, then she's an adult. So 9 is really moving into a type of adulthood in traditional culture. Obviously now, if we apply those same standards, a 9-year-old to us is like a child. But a lot of that has to deal with our own socialization. In other words, the expectations we have of them. If you go into, say, villages in Morocco, for instance, responsibilities are given to young people at much earlier ages than they're given to people in the cities. So you'll find in villages, somebody who's 8 or 9 years old is already having adult responsibilities. And so this is really important. So it has to do with attitude and things like that. So don't try to apply a 9-year-old of today's standards to a 9-year-old of 7th century Arabia, because I guarantee you there's absolutely no comparison. These were very mature people at an early age. And so that's important to remember that. Mm-hmm. I don't know if she had. I don't know. I don't know when she said that. But I know that there is the riwayah that she did give up her, she was no longer playing when she entered into the household of the Prophet ﷺ. Mm-hmm. No, by Sharia, a marriage can take place before that contractually. Yeah, a marriage can take place contractually. The wali can marry contractually before that, right? I mean, obviously, in our culture, and I think most of the Muslim world now, because people don't have the same type of maturity, and education is another factor also, right? Because education has extended childhood. That's what Neil Postman points out, is that modern education really has extended childhood. And the adolescent phase was created. It's a creation of the modern world. It's what the postmodernists would call an artificial construct. It's adolescence is a creation. The whole adolescent culture, right? I mean, adolescents in this culture were adults. And you can see that. They were becoming Muslim. They were, Osama bin Zayd led an army at the age of 17. But he was an adult, and that's how they viewed them. So it was a very different world then. And people's understandings were very different, so that's really important. The next chapter, let's see. I've actually got, let me try to get through these. I won't do the Hijrah because that's an important chapter. But basically what happens is a very interesting event occurs in Yathrib, which is called the Battle of Bu'ath. And this is important because all of the leaders of the Aus and the Khazraj were killed in this battle. Their elders were all killed in this battle. And the only one that doesn't go out on that day is Ubay, right? Abdullah ibn Ubay. He wants to become the king of the Khazraj. The Aus and the Khazraj were both called Al-Khazraj. And he's Ausi, he's not a Khazraji. But he wants to become the king. So he doesn't go out on the Yom al-Bu'ath. All of them die. According to our scholars, that was a preparation for the coming of the Prophet, because it's the elders that were the ones that opposed the message of the Prophet, and they would have done that in Medina as well, because they're going to lose their authority. And so Abdullah ibn Ubay he's the only one left from these characters. And Sa'd ibn Mu'adh was strong. I mean, they did have leaders, but they weren't like the ones that were killed at Bu'ath. And so what happens is that the leading men, a group of men, there's actually 12 men that come for the pilgrimage. And there's a pledge that they take with the Prophet, which is called Bay'at al-Aqaba. And it's Aqabat al-Ula. There's 2 of them. So they come and they take this pledge. And the pledge is that they won't steal, they'll believe in Allah, they won't associate with Allah, they won't steal, they won't fornicate, they won't slay their offspring, because there were women there. So they won't bury children alive. They won't utter slanders, and they will not disobey in anything that's right. And then the Prophet said, if you fulfill this pledge, paradise is yours, and if you commit one of these sins, then receive punishment for it in this world, and that will be an expiation. And if you conceal it, then Allah will forgive you if He wants. All right? So this is what happens now. The Prophet ﷺ, when they left for Yathrib, he sends with them 2 people. He mentions one, and that's Ibn Ishaq mentions one. There's another one that mentions 2, and even in Ibn Ishaq, when Sa'ad talks to them, he's talking as if there's 2. The other one is Abdullah ibn Maktoum, who was the mu'adhin. He becomes the mu'adhin later. He is the cousin of Khadija, and he sent. Both of them know a lot of Quran. Mus'ab ibn Umair, very important, from very strong Meccan family, and they go and they begin to teach these people that have just become Muslim. And one of the things that happens, this is really important, is that Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, who was one of the chiefs of the Aus, he doesn't like this idea, because again, he's tradition-based, and he sees Mus'ab. So he sends Usayd over to go and speak to them and tell these 2 to stop making fools of our brethren, by entering into their deen. And so he goes, and Mus'ab, he's actually quite harsh with him, but Mus'ab replies to him in a very sweet way. He said, won't you just listen to what I'm teaching? And he said, I'll listen. He tells him, he recognizes it, he becomes Muslim. He goes back to Sa'd, and now Sa'd's really upset, because he sent him to tell him to get. So he says, just come and listen. And Sa'd is very open-minded. He goes, sits, and he listens. He becomes a Muslim also. Now what happens is that they pray, and then he goes, and he goes to his people, the Aus, and he tells them, what do you say about me? And they all say, you're a Sayyid, you're our Sayyid. And he said, I won't speak to any of you until you become Muslim. And so they all become Muslim. That's real influence, right? Allahu Akbar. Mus'ab does during this period, and Mus'ab, the Prophet sent, this is the Hakim is the one, they say, أرسل حكيما ولا توصي. Send a wise man and don't give him advice. A proverb. Send a wise man and don't give him advice. In other words, if he has hikmah, he'll know what to do. Because the situation, you might not know the situation. If you advise him and then he thinks, I have to do what he told me, and the situation doesn't call for that, let him recognize the contextuality of situations so that he can act according to his own wisdom. That's what Mus'ab does. One of the things he does, first off, is when Sa'd becomes Muslim and these other, he asks him, tell him, who's this person? What does he like? What type of person is this? And he's doing really a psychological analysis of, and this is the science of da'wah. People think you can just go and say, brothers, salvation in this life and the next is dependent on, and give some kind of formulaic da'wah. That is not, every person needs, it's like homeopathy. Homeopathy is individualized. Western medicine, everybody gets the same medicine, without looking at the individual human being. Da'wah, you have to give da'wah with wisdom. One person might need to hear something completely different from another person. And it can't be formulaic, because then you're proselytizing. It's like preaching, and nobody likes to be preached to. And these people had incredible wisdom. They knew who they were talking to. They knew how to speak to them. And this is what Mus'ab did. He went and he really analyzed the community. He saw everything that was going on. And when the Prophet ﷺ came, the Prophet was given the complete like we'd say now, lowdown. He knew everything that was going on in that city. He knew who was influential. He knew who wasn't. He knew who was significant. He knew which people to treat in a certain way and which people to treat in another way. And this was all because of the work that Mus'ab did. So this is an important event. I mean, the hijrah wasn't just the Prophet just making hijrah. He sent somebody before him to really analyze and look at this situation. And this is what Mus'ab does. So this is really important point. And then what happens is, after Mus'ab's departure, the more of the Muslims of Yathrib went out to this the pilgrimage, 73 men and 2 women, hoping to make contact with the Prophet. And one of their leaders was a Khazraji named Bara'a, right, Ibn Ma'rur. And this man, he's an interesting man because they were praying facing Jerusalem. But Al-Bara'a, he couldn't do that. He felt the Prophet's in Mecca, I want to face Mecca. And so he faced the Kaaba. And then they kept telling him, you should face the Qibla, this way we were taught. Right? And they don't know yet. These are new Muslims, so they don't know these type things. So anyway, when he gets there, he actually tells the Prophet, now first I didn't have doubt, but now my kinsman made me feel all this doubt. I was facing Kaaba because I didn't feel appropriate turning my back to Kaaba. And the Prophet said, you were on a Qibla had you been patient. In other words, Jerusalem is a Qibla. And so he went back to facing Jerusalem. But what happens is, when they get there, they go out and they meet the Prophet ﷺ, and Abbas goes out with the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet gives them a talk, and he tells them, first Abbas mentions, right, people of Khazraj, you know the esteem we hold this man Muhammad ﷺ, and we have protected him from his people so that he is honored in his clan and safe in his country. Yet he hath resolved to turn unto you and join himself with you. So if you think that you will keep to what you promise and what you will protect him against all that shall oppose him, yours be that burden, right? So he's letting them know, we're entrusting our son to you. This is, and we're giving you this responsibility. And then the Prophet ﷺ recites some Quran, and then he makes a pact. And this is called Bay'at al-Harb. This is a pact of war. In other words, he's saying, you have to follow me willingly. And there were conditions. Ubadah ibn Samit says the conditions were 5. There was sama' and ta'a. They had to obey him and listen to him. In usr and yusr, hardship and ease, manshit wa makrah, difficulty and things that you wanted to do, things that you wanted to do, things you didn't want to do. And then also athara alayna, that they would prefer others over themselves. So that was part of the bay'ah, and this is preparation for the muhajirin. Because Allah says, yu'thiruna ala anfusihim, they prefer others over themselves. So they actually took bay'ah to do that. And then Allah nunazi' al-amra ahla, and that we would not fight the people who have authority over us. A very important point when the Saqifa comes later. You see, because the Quraysh, this is really interesting. This was an oath they took with the Prophet that they would not dispute people over political ascendancy. So when the time comes, when the Prophet ﷺ dies, and the Aws and the Khazraj begin to speak about electing a Khalifa from amongst themselves, Umar and Abu Bakr come and they say, this Amr is Quraysh's. And they submit to that because they took that bay'ah, that they would not dispute that. And then, وَنَقُولُ بِالْحَقِّ أَيْنَمَا كُنَّا, we say the truth wherever we are, and then that we don't fear concerning Allah the blaming of anyone who reproaches us. So these were the conditions that they took, and these were Bay'at al-Harb. So this second bay'ah, which is Bay'at al-Aqaba, after it happens, the Prophet ﷺ said that Shaitan was actually listening. And he screamed as loud as he could. And they said they'd never heard a scream like that. And he says, and he calls to the people of Mina. He says, people of Mina, wake up. Don't you oppose Mudhammam. That's what Shaitan called the Prophet ﷺ. And one of the things the Prophet ﷺ said, because it's the opposite of Muhammad, the blameworthy. And one of the things the Prophet said, because they used to write poetry against the Prophet ﷺ, but they would always call him Mudammam in the poetry. And the Prophet ﷺ would say, isn't it amazing how Allah has diverted their tongues from blaming me? They blame somebody called Mudammam, and I'm Muhammad. Allahu Akbar. See, that's the way you should look at things. It just makes life very easy. If you just, he looked at the best in every situation. Who are they talking about? That's not my name. Allahu Akbar. That they don't fear anything. They don't fear anybody blaming them for what they're doing. They only fear Allah. Yeah. So those were the conditions. He took bay'ah with them, and now, the other thing that I didn't mention before that is that he actually had a dream that he was shown where he would migrate to, and he said it was a place of date palms and water. And he actually thought it might be Al-Ahsa, which is Juwatha, or the place of Bani Abd Shams. And these were a tribe that lived in the eastern province of Arabia, near Dammam now. And they were the only other tribe, other than the people of Medina, that came into Islam without any coercion whatsoever. They actually came in full submission to the Messenger of Allah. And so he praised them. And he said that they're the most like the people of Medina. And I've been there, and I can testify to that to this day, that they are the most like the people of Medina, people of Juwatha. They're very gentle people and good people. Mm-hmm. That he was given forbearance, knowledge, certainty, and Islam, complete submission. About Khadija's children, she did have sons before the Prophet ﷺ, and there's not, he mentions a little bit in there about them, and I'll see if I can find out something else about them and mention that next week if I do. About the immigration here, because he was given permission to migrate, and the people begin to migrate from Medina until the only people that were left were the people closest to the Prophet ﷺ and the mustad'afin, the people who were completely weak. And Umar radiallahu anhu actually went out. He's the only one that went out and migrated. He announced it. He went and told Quraysh, I'm making hijrah to Medina. Does anyone have a problem with that? Right? All the other ones had to, they were afraid. Allahu Akbar, Umar. He was victory for Islam, when he came into Islam. About the conspiracy here, basically what happens is the Quraysh are now very fearful that the Prophet ﷺ, by migrating to Medina, he's going to get stronger. And they obviously can see this. And during the time, they spent 3 years trying to get Bani Hashim to give him up, to kill him when they made the sanctions. Now they've decided it's gone too far. They have a meeting in Darul Nidwa, and they start debating how they're going to kill him. And Abu Jahl comes up with a solution, which is, and this is all out of fear of tribal war, because if they would kill a man from a tribe, then they're going to have a war with the rest of his clan and all of those who have wala with that clan. So it's not just the Bani Hashim, but it's going to be the people married to Bani Hashim. It's going to be the people that have any mawali from Bani Hashim. So it's very problematic for them. So Abu Jahl comes up with a solution. And he says, let's take a youth from each one of our clans, and they can all stab at the same time. And so the blood will be on everybody. And there's no way that Bani Hashim could take care of all of us. And there's a sheikh from Najd who's in there, Shaitan. And he's they say he was a Sheikh Najdi, which is odd that he would have been let in, because this is a private meeting of Dawr al-Nidwa. But the Najdi Sheikh says, this is the best opinion, right? And he confirms it. And so they decide to do that. So they get their young men ready. Well, meantime, the Prophet ﷺ has been told by Jibreel what they're planning. And so he's also told what he's going to do is have Sayyidina Ali there in his bed. So all of them are watching the house. And they're planning on killing the Prophet on that night. And the Prophet ﷺ recites the words from Surah Yasin, وَجَعَلْنَا بَيْنَهُمْ سُدًّا وَمِنْ خَلْفِهِمْ سُدًّا فَأَغْشَيْنَاهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُبْصِرُونَ. Right? We placed in front and behind them a barrier, and they can't see us. And he actually threw dirt on them as he went out. And they all fell asleep. And they woke up with all this dirt on them. And then they went in and they pulled the cover off, and there's Sayyidina Ali. And the Prophet told him just to be there and not to be afraid. And he's at this time about 17 years of age. So he's a man. And the Prophet ﷺ goes out with Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu. And what happens is they have their camels and they go out to Jabal Thawr. And there's a cave there. And Asma, Abu Bakr's daughter, is coming out to give them food. They stayed there 3 nights. And they send out trackers to find them. And one of when they come to the ghar, a spider had built the web around it. And the trackers, and then there was a dove with the eggs over her young. And so they say there's nobody in the cave. Abu Bakr said, Wallahi, if one of them would have just looked at his feet, he would have seen him. And Abu Bakr was very frightened at this point, because he's frightened for the Messenger of Allah, not for himself. And the Prophet says to him, لا تحزن إن الله معنا. Don't have any grief, Allah is with us. Again, this is all the yaqeen of the Messenger of Allah. He had absolute certainty, because he was shown things. He was shown that he would be in Medina. He was shown that he would be given victory. He was shown that he would return back to Mecca. And in fact, one of the verses revealed on the Hijrah was, إِنَّ الَّذِي فَرَضَ عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لَرَادُّكَ إِلَى مَعَادٍ. The one who gave you the Quran, he is going to return you to Mecca. All right. So the Prophet ﷺ had no doubt about that. And then, inshallah, next week I'll go a little more into the Hijrah and some of the meanings from it. And then the entry into Medina, inshallah. Takbir!